Now, this is Saul talking to Jonathan, his son, chapter number 20, verse number 31. Thou shalt not be established, nor thy kingdom. Wherefore now send and fetch him unto me, for he shall surely die. So Saul was basically trying to just get Jonathan to understand, I know you've built this covenant and this bond with David, but you're never going to be the man as long as David exists. But we know that Jonathan and David were friends, probably like not very many friends are. Jonathan was willing to give up all of his promise, all of his inheritance, everything, just because he wanted to be in the will of God, and he knew that David was the will of God for Israel. So we're going to start reading. We're just going to kind of read a little bit, just because this will be a little bit different. I'm going to try something different today. We'll see how it works. But in chapter number 19, I'm not going to read the whole chapter right away. We're kind of going to read some verses. We're going to slow down a little bit, and just each time it kind of switches the topic, we'll try to just go and dive in there. So, and Saul chapter number 19, and Saul spake to Jonathan his son, and to all his servants, that they should kill David. So Saul has a meeting here. He's got all of his servants, got his son, and he just tells them flat out, my goal is to kill David. David is the enemy. Even though David was God's chosen person, God's chosen king, Saul said he's the enemy. So ultimately Saul's enemy was God himself. But David was God's piece that he was using. So, but Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, saying, Saul my father seeketh to kill thee. Now therefore I pray thee, take heed to thyself until the morning, and abide in a secret place, and hide thyself. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where thou art, and I will commune with my father of thee, and what I see, that I will tell thee. And Jonathan spake good of David unto Saul his father, and said unto him, let not the king sin against David his servant, against David, because he hath not sinned against thee, and because his works have been to thee word very good. So Jonathan understood that everything that David had ever done he never himself went against Saul. He did everything Saul told him to do, every command Saul ever gave him. He did it better than anybody else in the entire kingdom of Israel. So David wanted to do the will of Saul, because at that point, Saul, we'll go back here, David was anointed the king, but he had not been appointed. And he was not in a rush. He was going to let God do the work, let God establish that. And so as long as Saul was the king in Israel, David submitted himself to that authority. Even though he knew he was going to be the king, he submitted himself to the authority of Saul. And Jonathan's just telling his dad here that David has done everything that you've asked him to do. Why do you hate him so much? And David's works have been to thee word very good. For he did put his life in his hand, and slew the Philistine, and the Lord wrought a great salvation for all Israel. Thou sawest it, and didst rejoice. Wherefore then wilt thou sin against innocent blood, to slay David without a cause? This verse number 5 goes all the way back to chapter 17, and we know that's the story of David and Goliath, very, very well-established story. But at that point, Israel was just not they were in a recession. Everything about them was declining. They were not living in the power of God. And Jonathan's basically telling him, you were there when David risked his life. Y'all can come on in if you want. Anyway, I don't know where they're. Anyway, it'll be good. That was you want to go tell them they can come on in here. But Jonathan's telling Saul here that you were there when Israel was in a recession. David basically came out of nowhere, and David did what no other man would do. You asked multiple men to go fight this Philistine, and none of them would take up that responsibility. Nobody would take up that job, and David wasn't even worried about what Saul would give him. We know that Saul was going to give that man his daughter. He was going to become as one of Saul's children. Basically, he was going to have a place in the kingdom. And none of the other men would do that, but that wasn't what David was worried about. David was worried about that he realized that Israel was not living in the power of God, that the power of God, that Israel was still God's chosen people. That had not changed, and that still has not changed to this day. They are still God's chosen people. And David stood up for them and brought a great victory, and he brought a great revival. And Jonathan saying, you were there when that happened, and you were excited about it. And yet he was excited about it, but Saul very quickly realized that David was becoming greater than he was. And we dealt with that. Pride cometh before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. If there's ever been a story in the Bible of pride destroying somebody, it is definitely the life of Saul. Saul started out little in his own eyes, and ultimately, in the end, he was big in his own eyes, went out to establish his own righteousness by not doing what God told him to do. And because of that, the kingdom was taken away from him and his seed forever. And Jonathan knew that. And Jonathan's telling his dad, he's done nothing wrong. He's never done you wrong. He's never even talked bad about you. Why do you want to kill him? There's no reason to want to kill David. And that was in verse number 7. That was in verse number 5 there. And Saul hearkened unto the voice of Jonathan, and Saul sware, this is verse 6, as the Lord liveth, he shall not be slain. And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan showed him all those things, and Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as in times past. And there was war again, and David went out and fought with the Philistines and slew them with a great slaughter, and they fell from him. And the evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul, as he sat in his house with his javelin in his hand, and David played with his hand. Now we all know that, you go back to chapter number 16, that's when David was playing the harp for Saul, and at that time those evil spirits would cease. That Saul's heart would be calmed. The things that were causing trouble in his mind and in his body and in his emotional state would be calmed. And yet here in chapter 20, that no longer was taking place. The evil spirits came upon him, and even though David was playing the same harp, probably playing some of the same songs, the evil spirit did not cease this time. And even though Saul promised Jonathan that, you're right, Jonathan told him all these things, and Saul looked at him and said, son, you're right. Saul was a great politician. Probably just told Jonathan what he wanted to hear at that point, to get David back into his presence, get David out of the field, get him back to where Saul could see him, have his eyes on him. Because if we go back to chapter number 18, that's what Saul, it said that Saul's never ceased to look at David, to watch every step, trying to see where he was going, what he was doing at all times. And here, that evil spirit was no longer leaving Saul. And Saul sought to smite David, verse number 10, even to the wall with the javelin. But he slipped away out of Saul's presence, and he smote the javelin into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. And at that point in time, this is really when, until Saul died, Saul was continually against David. From this point until the day that Saul died and David became the king of Israel, there was never a day that Saul was not trying to kill David. The evil spirit just never went away anymore. And it was just always on, all because of pride, all because Saul would not humble himself to the will of God. And I think we can learn a lesson from that. If we don't do that, God has grace, God has mercy, God has long suffering, he is kind, he is gentle, he's all of those things. But there will come a point in time, the Bible talks about it in Hebrews, that their heart was hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. And he was talking about the children of Israel back in the wilderness. They had become so used to their sins, so used to doing what they were doing, that they didn't even realize what they were doing was wrong anymore. They just got a hard heart about it. And this is where Saul probably was at. It definitely looks like it. He got such a hard heart that he didn't even see that he was doing anything wrong. And he was just doing whatever he wanted to do to keep himself in power, whatever he could do. And yet all he was depressed. All he was just bitter and angry, and just live a life of resentment toward David. And so at this point, David is fleeing for his life all of the time. And then in verse 11, Saul also sent messengers unto David's house to watch him and to slay him in the morning. And if you remember back in chapter 18, the reason Saul wanted Michal, which was his daughter, to marry David was so that she could basically distract David from becoming what Saul knew he was becoming. Basically to be a distraction in his life. And at this point, Saul goes to her and says, well, it didn't work with Jonathan. So he thought, surely Michal will listen to me and she'll set him up to where I can kill him. What a great story here. What a great story. And so Michal let David, we'll go back to chapter number 11. And then Saul also sent messengers unto David's house to watch him and to slay him in the morning. And Michal, David's wife, told him, saying, if thou save not thy life tonight, tomorrow thou shalt be slain. And we know, we'll find out later on, Michal had her issues. Michal had some problems. But at this point, she loved David enough, just like Jonathan did, to save his life, to give David a warning here. And if thou shalt not save the life tonight, tomorrow thou shalt be slain. So Michal let David down through a window, and he went and fled and escaped. And Michal took an image and laid it in the bed, and put a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster, and covered it with cloth. And when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, he is sick. And Saul sent the messengers again to see David, saying, bring him up to me in the bed, that I may slay him. So it started out with Saul sending these messengers. They went into the house, and she just told him, he's sick, he can't talk right now. And that was a good enough answer for him. So they probably went back to Saul and just told him. And at this point, Saul was so mad, he said, go grab the bed, take him in the bed, bring him to me, and I'll kill him. He wanted him dead so bad. And so when the messengers were coming, behold, there was an image in the bed, and with a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster. And Saul said unto Michal, why hast thou deceived me so, and sent away mine enemy? And he is escaped. And Michal answered Saul, he said unto me, let me go, why should I kill thee? And so David fled and escaped, and came to Samuel to Ramah, and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and dwelt in Naioth. And it was told Saul, saying, behold, David is at Naioth in Ramah. And Saul sent messengers to take David. And when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying over them, the Spirit of God was upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. And when it was told Saul, he sent other messengers, and they prophesied likewise. And Saul sent messengers again the third time, and they prophesied also. Then went he also to Ramah, and came to a great well that is in Sechu, and he asked and said, where are Samuel and David? And one said, behold, they be at Naioth and Ramah. And he went thither to Naioth and Ramah, and the Spirit of God was upon him also, and he went on and prophesied until he came to Naioth and in Ramah. And he stripped off his clothes also, and prophesied before Samuel in like manner, and lay down naked all that day and all that night. Wherefore they say, is Saul also among the prophets? So David went probably to the safest place he could have probably went to. He went to the man of God. He went and got covered in the Spirit of God. He went to the place where God dwelt. He knew that Samuel was obviously the prophet in Israel at this time. He was the man, and he was the one that anointed David. And so David went to him, and there God just protected him. This is just a great story of God's protection. When you go to the man of God, you go to the place of God, you go where the Spirit of God is, there's guaranteed protection there. All of these people that went to that Saul sent, a miracle took place. Their ability to prophesy, their ability to speak the things that they were speaking did not ordinarily happen, but God and God's divine protection, because again, David was God's will for Israel. David was going to make it. There wasn't nobody going to come between God's will and Saul's will. God's will was going to be done no matter what miracle it took. And even Saul himself stripped off those royal garments and prophesied before Samuel in like manner. We know that Saul was not living in the Spirit of God. He was not living, but because of God's will, Saul was able to do these things because David was going to be protected. He was going to be protected. So now we're going to go into chapter number 20 as well, because it kind of just goes right along with what's going on here in this chapter of David's life. So we'll keep on reading here. And David fled from Naioth and Ramah, and came and said before Jonathan, what have I done? what is mine iniquity, and what is my sin before thy father, that he seeketh my life? And again, David is just, and I would be confused too if I was David. All I've ever done for Saul is say, yes, sir. That's all I've ever done. All I've ever done is do what he asked me to do and do it to the absolute best of my ability. And Saul says that David was his enemy. And yet, if you read all throughout David's life, David never did anything to Saul that would make David Saul's enemy. Maybe God, obviously God, Saul probably viewed David as his enemy because God might have been Saul's enemy. But David was not Saul's enemy. David only did what Saul ever asked him to do. Saul was definitely David's enemy. Saul was against David, but David was never against Saul. And David's a little confused because he's asking Jonathan, what have I done? What have I sinned? What have I ever done wrong? And I think there's points and times in my life where there's been situations where I've wondered those things. You know, why is so-and-so upset with me, or why are they mad at me when I've never done them wrong, never one time done anything to them that could even make them think that I don't like them or that I've done something wrong to them. But, David was just confused. And I think sometimes there might be situations in our life where we might get a little confused as to what we've ever done to somebody to make them. But it's not our job to wonder what we've done. It's just our job to do what God tells us to do. And we'll begin reading again in verse number 2. And he said unto him, God forbid, thou shalt not die. Behold, my father will do nothing, either great or small, but that he will show it me. And why should my father hide this thing from me? It is not so. And David sware moreover and said, thy father certainly knoweth that I have found grace in thy eyes. And he saith, let not Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, there is but a step between me and death. And so what I gathered here was that I don't think Saul told Jonathan after that point where he told Jonathan, hey, I'm not going to kill David. It's okay. He told Jonathan exactly what he wanted him to hear. And so he probably just quit talking to Jonathan about this situation because he realized that every time he told Jonathan anything, David found out about it, and then David was able to escape. And so then he went to Micah, which was David's wife, and he found out then too. He told her, and so I'm pretty sure his level of trust in a lot of people probably started dwindling there, because every time he'd ever tell anybody what his plan was, David would find out about it and was able to escape the sword and escape the javelin and the spears. And so as far as Jonathan was concerned, the last time he had spoke to his father about this was, it's okay, son. I'm not going to kill David. I know he's your friend. I know he hasn't done anything wrong. And so Jonathan's a little bit disturbed here, thinking, what is David even talking about? My father's not going to kill me. And if he is, he's going to tell me first. He's going to let me know, and then I'll let you know. But David's saying there's something wrong here. You need to watch out. I can't come around. I can't be hanging out anymore. I've got to distance myself from y'all. And so in verse number 5, David said unto Jonathan, behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king at meat, but let me go, that I may hide myself in the field unto the third day at even. If thy father at all miss me, then say, David earnestly asked leave of me, that he might run to Bethlehem his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the family. If he say thus, it is well, thy servant shall have peace. But if he be very wroth, then be sure that evil is determined by him. Therefore thou shalt do kindly with thy servant, for thou hast brought thy servant into a covenant of the Lord with thee. Notwithstanding, if there be in me iniquity, slay me thyself, for why wouldest thou bring me to thy father? And Jonathan said, far be it from thee, for if I knew certainly that evil were determined by my father to come upon thee, then would not I tell it thee? Then said David to Jonathan, who shall tell me, or what if thy father answer thee roughly? And Jonathan said unto David, come and let us go into the field. And they went out both of them into the field. And Jonathan said unto David, O Lord God of Israel, when I have sounded my father about tomorrow, any time or the third day, and behold, if there be good toward David, and I send on unto thee, and show it thee, the Lord do so, and much more to Jonathan. But if it please my father do evil, then I will show it thee and send thee away, that thou mayest go in peace, and the Lord be with thee, and as he hath been with my father. And thou shalt not only while yet I live show me kindness of the Lord, that I die not, but also thou shalt not cut off thy kindness from my house forever. Know not when the Lord hath cut off the enemies of David, every one from the face of the earth. So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, let the Lord even require it at the hand of David's enemy. And so right here, I love this covenant. We all know the Mephibosheth, right? This is where that covenant was made, right here, saying that if Saul is going to take and going to do harm to David, and he knew that at that point, if there was a new king in Israel, the only two ways that was going to happen was either all of the king's family was dead. Every single person in the lineage had to be completely wiped out. There could not be any heirs to the throne. So therefore, all of Jonathan's kids had to die. Anybody that could ever possibly have the authority or the right to come back had to be wiped out. And so Jonathan here is saying, if it's true, if my father hates you to the point where he's going to just get rid of you, just make a promise to me that my house, you will protect it. You will show mercy. And we know that David held up his end of the bargain there. He held up his end of that covenant. And thank the Lord for mercy there, because Mephibosheth definitely should have died. All of Jonathan's family should have died, but David remembered that covenant with his friend. And Jonathan caused David to swear again because he loved him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. And great, the verse that I was looking for, I remember last week I had it. But greater love hath no man than this, than that a man would lay down his life for his friend. Jonathan was willing to lay down his life for David, and I believe David was willing to lay down his life for Jonathan as well. They both loved each other so much. Then Jonathan said to David, tomorrow is the new moon, and thou shalt be missed, because thy seat will be empty. And when thou hast stayed 3 days, then thou shalt go down quickly and come to the place where thou didst hide thyself when the business was in the hand, and shalt remain by the stone Ezel. And I will shoot 3 arrows on the side thereof, as though I shot at a mark. And behold, I will send a lad, saying, go find out the arrows. If I expressly say unto the lad, behold, the arrows are on this side of thee, take them, then come down, for there is peace to thee and no hurt, as the Lord liveth. But if I say thus unto the young man, behold, the arrows are beyond thee, go thy way, for the Lord hath sent thee away. And as touching the matter which thou and I have spoken of, behold, the Lord be between thee and me forever. So David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon was come, the king sat down to eat meat. And the king sat upon his seat, as at other times, even upon a seat by the wall. And Jonathan arose, and Abner sat by Saul's side, and David's place was empty. Nevertheless, Saul spake not anything that day, for he thought something had befallen him. He is not clean. Surely he is not clean. And it came to pass on the morrow, which was the 2nd day of the month, that David's place was empty. And Saul said unto Jonathan his son, wherefore cometh not the son of Jesse to meet, neither yesterday nor today? And Jonathan answered Saul, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. And he said, let me go, I pray thee, for our family hath a sacrifice in the city, and my brother, he hath commanded me to be there. And now if I find favor in thine eyes, let me get away, I pray thee, and see my brethren. Therefore he cometh not to the king's table. Here we go. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said unto him, thou son of the perverse, rebellious woman, do not I know that thou hast chosen the son of Jesse to thine own confusion, and unto the confusion of thy mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse liveth upon the ground, thou shalt not be established, nor thy kingdom. Wherefore now send and fetch him unto me, for he shall surely die. Now I find this very interesting, because I think Saul, the reason he didn't ask the first day was, I believe Saul was really hoping that David was dead. I think that's what he thought. He probably thought David has finally fallen, nothing to worry about. And so that second day, he just asked Jonathan, what happened to David? Where's he at? Maybe he just figured, he fell, he had fallen, he had done something wrong. Maybe he disqualified himself or something. And I think David was probably a little bit of joy in his heart, thinking, not seeing David at the table. But when Jonathan told him it happened exactly the way David told him it was going to happen. He said, if Saul miss me, it'll be okay. But if he's not going to miss me, he wants me dead. And at this point, there was no confusion in Jonathan's mind that David could not, and Jonathan and David could not be together. He could not be in the king's palace. And it's just, I'm just thinking about this whole, Saul had so much bitterness in his heart for no reason whatsoever toward David. And he basically just tells Jonathan, you do realize that the kingdom is not yours anymore. If David lives, the kingdom's not yours. But Jonathan was okay with that. Jonathan loved David, knew that David was to be the king. And Jonathan, in verse 32, and Jonathan answered Saul his father and said unto him, wherefore shall he be slain? What hath he done? That seemed to be a theme question there. What had David ever done? And we can read that David had never done anything wrong. David had never done any wrong in the sight of really any of the people. Nobody had anything bad to say about David. But we could almost liken that to Jesus. I was just thinking about that while I was reading it this morning. Jesus, what did Pilate ask? I find no fault in him. Can you give me a reason why I should kill him? And nobody ever could give him a reason. Nobody could, because Jesus had done. Now, we obviously know David was not perfect. But David had done no wrong, and yet everybody wanted him dead. Everybody wanted him killed. And the reason that the world wanted him killed was because they didn't want a king in their own heart. They didn't want God to rule and reign. Israel was looking for a king that would come to establish a kingdom, to get them out of the Roman Empire, to get them out of the rule of their slavery. In reality, they wanted the lion to come down. And yet, even though Jesus had done no wrong, they did not want somebody to, which was Saul's problem too. They did not want somebody to live in them, to guide them. They wanted a rise of a rebellion, a conqueror, but they did not want somebody to tell them what to do and what not to do. And that's what Saul didn't want. Saul didn't want somebody to tell him what to do and what not to do. And so just like David, I think right here is kind of a picture, honestly, of Jesus. Because there was no fault in Jesus. There was no reason to kill Jesus. And yet, the whole world, the kings of the world, the high priests, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, all of them wanted Jesus dead. And there wasn't a reason for it. There was no reason to kill David. There was no reason to want to kill Jesus. And Saul cast a javelin at him to smite him, whereby Jonathan knew that it was determined of his father to slay David. There was no going back. There was no going back at this point. Saul would not stop until David was dead. And so Jonathan arose from the table in a fierce anger and did eat no meat a second day of the month, for he was grieved for David, because his father had done him shame. And it came to pass in the morning that Jonathan went out into the field at the time appointed with David and a little lad with him. And he said unto the lad, run, find out the arrows which I shoot. And as the lad ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. And when the lad was come to the place of the arrow which Jonathan had shot, Jonathan cried after the lad and said, is not the arrow beyond thee? And Jonathan cried after the lad, make speed, haste, stay not. And Jonathan's lad gathered up the arrows, and it came to his master. And the lad knew not anything, only Jonathan and David knew the matter. And Jonathan gave his artillery unto the lad and said unto him, go, carry them to the city. And as soon as the lad was gone, David rose out of the place toward the south and fell on his face to the ground and bowed himself 3 times. They kissed one another and wept one with another until David exceeded. And Jonathan said to David, go in peace, for as much as we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord be between me and thee, between my seed and thy seed forever. And he arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. And that's how far we're going to get. I just want to kind of just give a little bit of a thing here. We're not going to get into chapter number 21 here. But at this point, David was absolutely going to run for his life. There was no going back. Jonathan knew that this might be one of the last times they were able to really see each other, to be with each other, until the point that the will of God was done, until Saul and both Jonathan were dead. And I find that it's just a sad thing to read the story of Saul and to read the story here of a man who had so much promise. He had so much promise, and yet he never fulfilled it because he would not submit himself to the authority of God, to the authority of God. And David did submit himself to the authority of God. He did submit himself to what God had for him. And Jonathan and David had that friendship, that bond that could not be broken. And what will happen if bitterness is able to take hold in your life? It'll destroy your relationships. It'll destroy your families. It'll destroy any promise that you have in your. I've been dealing with this a lot. Pride in your own life. All that Brother Gravely was preaching the other night, Wednesday night. He preaching out of there in Joshua chapter number 9, where Israel had just come out, and Israel had a problem with this. They had just come out of defeating Jericho, seeing this great victory wrought in the life of Israel. And immediately they went to Ai, that little bitty town, not a lot of people. They went and scouted it out, and they said, they're so small, we don't even need the whole army. We only need a few men. We'll go in, we'll take it, no problem. They didn't seek God's counsel. They didn't seek God's wisdom. They got prideful. They said, we're Israel. And they forgot to seek the counsel of God. And instead of having a great victory in Ai, they had a great defeat. People lost their lives all because one person and a nation lost sight of who they were following. And that's what Saul did. Saul lost sight of how he started. How did he begin? He didn't begin all bad. He didn't begin with a heart of pride necessarily, but he got to where it was all about him and not about the Lord Jesus Christ. It was all about him and not about the will of God. It was all about him and not just submitting himself to the authority of Christ. And ultimately it destroyed his son. It destroyed his entire family. But thankfully, thank the Lord for that covenant between Jonathan and David there. Because of that covenant, there were a lot of people that did not die. There were a lot of people that were saved because of the love that David and Jonathan had for each other. And David was, at this point, he was in a battle for his life. He was in the will of God. He was set apart for a purpose by God. And yet it seemed he could never catch a break. From the very man who was his leader, Saul was his leader, a man who should have wanted the best for him, he always wanted the worst. And Saul set up everybody against David, plotted against David. And yet we can have faith and trust that if God has a plan, and he does have a plan and purpose for your life, his will be done. And I know we read a lot of verses. I just want to get through those 2 chapters really quick today because it kind of just sets the pace for where we're going to be at next week in chapter number 21. And but God will work out. All things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are called according to his purpose. You might not see the reason for it right now. There's hardships, there's turmoils, there's strife. But if you're saved, if you're one of God's children, if you are in the will of God, those things that you can't see the reason for them right now, one day you will see the reason for them because God will work it for his honor, for his glory. God will get the glory out of your life. And thankful for the word of God this morning, thankful for the stories and the lessons we can learn from it. I know I enjoyed reading. It's been a while since I've read the story of David and just tried to, I've been listening to it, reading it, and there's just so much in the life of David and how much we can correlate it to our own lives. And I'm just thankful for that. So we'll pray and be dismissed this morning. Dear Father, thank you for the day. Thank you for the opportunity to be in your house again. Lord, I just pray you'd help us, dear Lord, just to have a good Sunday today. That, dear God, our hearts would be in tune with Christ, and you bring the people in that need to be here. And that, Lord, to be Brother Chris this morning as he preaches. Dear God, there'd be power and unction from on high. Give us the ability to worship you in the singing and in the praising this morning, the testifying, Lord. Thank you for all you've done for us, all that you are going to do. And, dear God, the ability for us to rest in you and rest in your will and desire, Lord, knowing that you are on the throne and that, dear God, you've never left and you never will. You are always going to be in control. We thank you for that. And we praise you and honor you this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. You've got about 20 minutes. Amen. It'll get better every week. I'm trying to just figure it out.